As we close in on the halfway point of the season, the Indianapolis Colts head to Houston to take on CJ Stroud and the Texans. Can Anthony Richardson have success against the Texans defense? And how does the return of Jonathan Taylor and DeForest Buckner impact the matchup? Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Horseshoe Huddle Podcast presented by Indianapolis Colts on SI.com, part of the Fans First Sports Network. My name is Andrew Moore, and as always, I'm joined here by my co-host of the Horseshoe Huddle Podcast, Drake Wally. Drake, big game in the AFC South. The last game was very, very close. The Texans came out on top 29-27 in Indianapolis. And for all of the drama, I would say, that's happened with the Colts this year with injuries, poor performances, if the Colts win on Sunday, they are tied with the Texans for the top spot in the AFC South. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and that's absolutely mind-boggling to think because it's a tale of two different seasons. You've got the Colts over here who have had arguably one of the most tumultuous ones, yet they're 4-3, and the Texans are 5-2, just came off of a close loss to the Packers. But, they look great. They look as good as they have, and they look like they're picking up where they left off last year. We're going to get into some guys that they're not going to have that they had in this first matchup against the Colts, but this is probably going to be a closer game than a lot of people think, even the Vegas odds makers.
Yeah, and it always is between the Colts and the Texans because they're divisional opponents. The last time that this game was over 10 points was in week 2 of last year when the Colts won in Houston 31-20. CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson were both in their second NFL games. Richardson went out with the concussion. The last 2 games between these two teams have been absolute nail biters. So it's going to be a really tight game. I know that the Texans have been on a roll. They're coming off of a pretty bad loss to the Green Bay Packers in terms of getting beat up front. So they're going to be looking for some redemption. But this Colts team is getting back some key players that I think are going to make a pretty big impact on Sunday. The chat is already fired up. We've got Patrick, who's not going to be able to make it, but he says he's guessing it'll be 26-24 Colts. Let's go positive attitude. Go Grant Stewart. So Patrick, well, hey, at least you're going to be, hopefully you'll listen to us on Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever he listens to his podcast afterwards. But Patrick, good to see you. You get your prediction in early. At least Truitt is here as well. Good to see you. Of course, Stats Matt, the third host of the show, Sean Contright, Paul Wilson. We've got all the heavy hitters in here tonight. Greg Eggleston as well. So big show tonight. We're going to dive into this Colts Texans matchup. Of course, we'll talk about Anthony Richardson and our expectations for number 5, what he needs to do in order to beat and take down this Texans defense. And then, of course, we'll look at the Colts defense trying to get redemption against Joe Mixon, who ran wild against the Colts in that week 1 matchup, and it's certainly going to help having DeForest Buckner back in the fold, Drake. But before we dive in, of course, you guys, please be sure to go follow us on all of our socials, like Horseshoe Huddle on Facebook, follow at Colts on _SI on X, and then make sure you're subscribed to the Horseshoe Huddle YouTube channel and click that bell so you know when Drake and I go live every Monday and Thursday night. And if you can't catch us, like I said before, wherever you listen to podcasts, please subscribe. Give us a 5-star review so we can reach other Colts fans just like you. So, Drake, you talked about it earlier. The Vegas odds makers, they think this one isn't going to be as close as what we think, giving the Texans a 5-point advantage. Colts are 5-point dogs heading into Houston. The over-under is 46. If I'm being honest, I'm probably taking the over in this one. The over hit in week 1. I think it's probably going to hit in week 2 or week 8 as well. But usually they do give the home team about 2 to 3 points, just kind of depending on the matchup. But 5 points, I think that it's going to be Vegas still thinks it's going to be a 1-possession game. And maybe I could see the Colts being down 5 on the final drive or something like that. But I don't think this game is going to be decided until late in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and it's kind of similar to the way that it was last time where it came down to a nail biter. Colts obviously lost by 2, but I'm taking the over as well. And I think that with the +5, you're looking at recent struggles with Richardson. He's coming off of a game where he was like 41% passing. Now you're playing the Texans defense that's got like a top 5 pass defense. So I mean, this is it's going to be tough. I'll say that because week 1, the Texans, they had just put Danielle Hunter out there for the first time. It was the first game of the year. Now they've had a chance to see Will Anderson have 6.5 sacks and Danielle Hunter with 3.5. So this is going to be a tough game, but I really think that the Colts are going to close that spread. I just don't see it being more than 5. I see this being like a 3 or 2 point victory.
I think I would agree. But in order to make this a close game, I think Anthony Richardson really needs to have his best game of the season. And honestly, Drake, when you look at Anthony Richardson against the Houston Texans, very small sample size. I know only 5 quarters and some change, but I wrote about this today on horseshoehuddle.com that in those 5 quarters, Anthony Richardson has 359 total yards. Jeez. That's passing and rushing, 359 total yards and 5 touchdowns against the Houston Texans. So he's had success. He's had arguably his best games against the Houston Texans. And you're hoping that carries over into this matchup this week in Houston. But it's not going to be easy. The Texans have the fourth best passing defense in the entire NFL. They're only giving up on average 167.7 yards per game. The Miami Dolphins have the number 1 passing offense. The Titans have the number 3 passing offense. So the Colts have faced in the past 3 weeks 3 out of the 4 best pass defenses in the NFL, and they have the Jets in a few weeks, which is the number 2 ranked pass defense. So definitely hasn't been an easy stretch for the Colts, for Anthony Richardson, Joe Flacco in that game against the Titans. But what are your expectations for Anthony Richardson coming into this game? Obviously coming off of I wouldn't say his worst performance against the Dolphins, but certainly wasn't good enough by his standards, by what you want to see out of Anthony Richardson. So do you think he's going to be able to bounce back, or will there be opportunities for him to bounce back, I should say? Or do you think it's going to be kind of, again, an up and down, and you're more expecting him to struggle against this Texans defense?
It's hard to say with Richardson, right? Because he missed some really easy throws in that game against the Dolphins. You just have to say it. You have to be honest. Yeah, you could put a little bit of blame on receivers and the play calling, but Richardson missed some of those throws. So that's up to him if he's going to be accurate and hit the gimme throws. Now, I'm more worried about, can Steichen get the receivers open? Okay, I know that sounds crazy because last year he looked great. He did good things with the offense. This year it's been a little different. We've seen defenses be able to adjust to Shane Steichen, and at least the receivers out there. Case in point, this Dolphins game, he even mentioned there wasn't much open out there when I looked at the tape. So, it's going to be up to Shane Steichen. I think that you're probably going to see him try to establish some kind of rhythm with Richardson, whether that's with the ground game, because he had success in that last game with his feet and against the Texans in both contests he's played previously, but also quick hitters, easy throws, bubble screens, RPOs, get the ball out of the guy's hand and alleviate Will Anderson and alleviate Danielle Hunter, because they're going to be coming after Richardson all game. So after what we saw against the Dolphins, I fully expect there to be blitzing. I expect them to be aggressive with DeMeco Ryans and try to make Richardson beat him passing.
I agree to an extent, but I honestly think it might be more to the run game. To be honest, we kind of saw the quarterback run game get Anthony Richardson into a rhythm to end the game, because he started the game 5 for 18, and then when he was able to use his legs a little bit more, he finally started to get into a rhythm in the fourth quarter and ended up finishing the game 5 of 6 there in the fourth quarter. So it was a really good final quarter for Anthony Richardson, in my opinion, and I think you want to continue that. The biggest thing for Shane Steichen this week is to just give Anthony Richardson the easy throws. Not only the easy throws, but the easy decisions, just those easy, quick, easy win plays that'll allow him to get into a rhythm, allow him to settle down into the game. I think that's what's going to be huge. And you remember last year against the Texans, that week 2 matchup in Houston, 2 rushing touchdowns in the first quarter for Anthony Richardson. He was killing them with his legs. And the reason I say this matchup could look the same is or close to what we saw last year in that week 2 matchup is it's looking like Azeez Al-Shaair, the big linebacker acquisition that the Texans got in the offseason, it's not looking good for him to play. And he has definitely been one of their best defenders against the run and right there in the middle of the defense for them. Henry To'oTo'o is dealing with a concussion. He did not participate today in practice. That's 2 of the starting linebackers for the Houston Texans. You got to take advantage of that if both those guys aren't out there, whether it's with Anthony Richardson, whether it's with Jonathan Taylor, who we'll talk about in a bit. But if you're able to get to that, have the offensive line get to that second level and really attack those linebackers, put those linebackers in some precarious situations when it's not their best linebackers out there, I think you can really take advantage of that. And then through the air, Drake, get Josh Downs on some of those linebackers. Take advantage of that with Mo Alley Cox over the middle, Drew Ogletree. That's where I think you can really attack this defense. Not necessarily attacking Derek Stingley Jr., Kamari Lassiter, those guys, but just attack the middle of the field. Make it so Anthony Richardson doesn't have to go all the way across the field with his reads. He doesn't have to move his feet, because that's been one of the biggest things is his feet just haven't been lined up properly. Allow him to get into that rhythm over the middle of the field. Attack those linebackers, really put pressure on those reserve linebackers. And I think that's where you can probably have the most success, at least early in this game, is you really attack those guys, get them back on your heels, and then you can start looking at those shots on the outside. Obviously, you're going to want to continue to look for Alec Pierce down the field, but it's just give him the easy stuff. Get him into a rhythm early so he doesn't take him a long time to get into a rhythm, or the Colts are down in the fourth quarter and then Richardson has to be Superman to bring him back.
Yeah, and this is also, I love that you mentioned Josh Downs. 2 things. Number one, he did not play in week 1. All right, so the Texans did not see Josh Downs.
Right.
But he had 1 catch on 3 targets for 3 yards with Richardson. Now, his previous 3 games, he had 24 catches for over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns with Flacco. Okay, so both Steichen and Richardson have got to try to incorporate Josh Downs more. Okay, so I think that once you get Josh Downs a couple of throws, it just opens up everything else, because he's not just a guy that's going to catch a 7-yard slant and fall down. He's the kind of guy that if you miss a tackle, he's got the speed to outrun people. So I think that is a big emphasis. That should be a big offensive emphasis, is not just get the ground game going, Andrew, but incorporate number 1, because Josh Downs, I know Michael Pittman's the guy, but Josh Downs is absolutely the tone setter and the volume receiver.
And Downs can eat over the middle of the field. And the stats Matt points out, Jimmy Ward, they're really good safety there in Houston, hasn't practiced either. That could be 3 of the best players that the Texans have in the middle of their defense out for this matchup. You have to take advantage of that. You have to take advantage of those guys being out, of the Texans being undermanned in those areas, and make those mismatches happen. Use Josh Downs over the middle on those quick throws, especially if the Texans are bringing the heat like the Dolphins did, because as I wrote in my piece, the Texans have that film too. They saw exactly what the Dolphins did last week against Richardson and how he struggled to really adjust to that. Then the Colts really didn't have a lot of answers for getting the ball out quickly. That's on Shane Steichen and the play calling, and it's also on Anthony Richardson for and his ability to diagnose those things. Use Josh Downs in that area. Use Mo Alley Cox in that area. Hell, even use Kylan Granson and Will Mallory. Use your tight ends. Something that the Colts haven't done all season, really. Start doing that right over the middle of the field. I think you can get a lot of easy yardage there. And if the Texans are going to try what the Dolphins did, again, this is kind of what we talked about. How do you get the pass rush? How do you stop the pressure? Get the ball out quickly. So use your quick win guy in Josh Downs and use your tight ends. Use those guys to your advantage. And I think that is going to be the best way for Anthony Richardson to not only get into a rhythm, but to have the most success against this Texans defense. And it certainly doesn't hurt getting Jonathan Taylor back. And guys, we've been talking about this for 3 weeks now, but all indications are Jonathan Taylor will be back this weekend against the Houston Texans. He was a limited participation in practice on Wednesday, full participant today. He looks good. He feels good. I would fully expect Jonathan Taylor to be out there on Sunday against the Texans. And Drake, the Colts are going to need him because the Texans have the number 8th ranked run defense in the NFL. This is a really solid run defense, really solid defense all the way around. But again, like I said, there's a really good chance you're not going to have Al-Shaair. You might not have Toa. Jimmy Ward might not be able to be there in the middle. You're going to have opportunities to reach that second level. And as soon as Jonathan Taylor can reach that second level, a lot of times he can make those guys miss and he can make some big plays. But the question is, are we going to see a full workload Jonathan Taylor, or are the Colts going to be careful with Jonathan Taylor, ease him back into things, not necessarily right off the bat give him 20 carries against the Texans, but do you think we see more of an 8 to 10 carry performance out of Jonathan Taylor and kind of splitting those with Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson? What do you think?
I think that if I had to go with the side, it's going to be that they're going to go with the side of caution because it's a high ankle. You can't mess around with lower extremity injuries with especially your running back and wide receivers. So I think that they're going to probably give him a limited carry package, if you will. But he didn't play that great against the Texans in week 1. It was Richardson who led the way with the rushing yards. But just even having Taylor out there is just instrumental. And I think that Goodson and Sermon, just having Richardson out there, that helps them because, we saw against the Dolphins, you even mentioned it, and it's on tape. It's probably the most ridiculous overcommit I've ever seen to try to stop a quarterback from running the football. Both linebacker, I think a linebacker and a defensive end or something from the Dolphins, when Tyler Goodson scored, they looked right at Richardson and they crashed in, and there goes Goodson. They completely said, you know what? It's not going to 31. We're going to go after number 5. Anthony Richardson out there is going to amplify any running back next to him. So if Jonathan Taylor can even get 10, 11, 12 carries, there's always a chance that one of those could pop off, especially with Richardson on the field.
Yeah, I think that going into it, the Colts are going to be a little bit cautious with Jonathan Taylor, but it would not surprise me if Taylor starts out hot and they ride the hot hand, or after the second quarter, they check in with Jonathan Taylor, see how he's doing, and if he's not overly sore at that point, and if he's feeling good, then they probably lean on him. I really do think that they're going to take this, they're going to decide as the game goes along, because ideally you want Jonathan Taylor out there. This Colts offense is at its best with Jonathan Taylor out there, so that way not all the pressure has to be on Anthony Richardson. If the defense has to account for Jonathan Taylor just as much as Anthony Richardson in that ground game. And like you mentioned, we saw just how important Anthony Richardson is to the Colts rushing attack and how defenses focus in on him if he starts to get going. If that happens again, Jonathan Taylor could be in for a really big game in his return, because if those linebackers are waiting a half a second or just sliding over to where they think Richardson's going to take the ball, all of a sudden you have Jonathan Taylor, he could be gone. He really could be. It's just like that. We saw what Tyler Goodson was able to do. Jonathan Taylor's a step above Tyler Goodson in the explosive category. Our first stat of the day presented by Busch Light. Anthony Richardson has 123 yards rushing from scrambles, 44 yards over expected, and that's the 4th most in the NFL, despite missing 2 games, by the way. Houston has allowed 174 scramble rush yards, which is 62 over expected, the 2nd most in the NFL. Incredible stat by Stats Matt.
Yeah.
That's why I think this running game is going to be so important, Drake, especially with Anthony Richardson. That's how you get into a rhythm. That's how you really hurt this Texans run defense and get them on their heels and make them start to commit towards the run. If they start to really have to commit towards the run to stop Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor, what does that do? That opens up the deep ball to Alec Pierce. That opens up stuff over the middle and to the outside to Michael Pittman, allows Josh Downs to get free. I really think this is going to be an old-fashioned type of game where you're going to use the run to set up the pass. And if the Colts don't have success in the running game, then I think it's going to be really, really tough to beat this Texans team.
Yeah, and you're talking about a Texas team, like you mentioned, that's incredibly well-rounded. And even with these injuries, they're still going to pose a threat to you. But like you said, I would love to see Indianapolis come out there and just power run football. Greg Roman back when they had Lamar Jackson type of stuff, where it's just you set up those explosive passes just by using your efficient run game. And a guy like Richardson and Taylor, both those guys, and Goodson, those are guys that can honestly operate a run game almost like a pass game because they can get chunk yards. So we'll have to see. But Andrew, I'd be so happy if the Colts would just go out there, ground and pound. Richardson finishes like 12 for 16, something kind of like Malik Willis did against the Colts.
You could see it because we've seen Shane Steichen before run the football in 20 straight plays. If he's like that guy that finds the cheat codes or finds the cheese play in Madden that always works, and he's going to continue. He's going to continue to spam that play until you stop it. Shane Steichen has zero problem doing that. It's one of the reasons I love him. It's kind of a troll in a way for an offensive play caller. But hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that's what Shane Steichen does at times when he's calling a football game. On the opposite side of things, sometimes he doesn't adjust appropriately, like how he did against the Dolphins last week. Definitely something that Steichen needs to improve on. And it's like Stats Matt is reading my mind, because our next topic about this Colts offense, yes, we talked about what we expect out of Anthony Richardson, what do we expect out of Jonathan Taylor, but the Texans do have some game wreckers on the defensive side of the ball, particularly at the edge rusher position. Will Anderson is turning into he's quickly becoming one of the most feared pass rushers in the NFL. He's having a monster second year. We kind of expected this out of Will Anderson after a really, really stellar rookie campaign. And then Danielle Hunter, his numbers aren't the same as what they were with the Minnesota Vikings a year ago, but he's still playing fantastic football and creating a lot of pressure at a very high rate. And that brings us to stat number 2, the Stats Matt stat of the day presented by Busch Light. Danielle Hunter is first in the NFL with 39 pressures. Will Anderson is 6th with 32. That's going to be a hell of a matchup to watch on Sunday, Drake. Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson going up against Bernhard Raimann and Braden Smith. Bernhard Raimann has continued his stellar play from a year ago. I'm not too worried about Bernhard Raimann. I'm more worried about Braden Smith because, again, Braden Smith just isn't 100% healthy. That knee is still bothering him. We were hoping that knee issue would be fixed. It hasn't caused him to miss any game action. He's played through it. He's had to rest during the week at practice, but he's been out there and able to play each week. But he hasn't been. You can obviously tell when you watch the game, when you look at the film, Braden Smith is not 100% out there, and it's forced him to try to compensate. He struggled at times, so if I think the weak spot between, if the weak link between those two guys, it's got to be Braden Smith. So Drake, how confident are you in the Colts tackle tandem that they're going to be able to contain Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, so either one of these guys doesn't go out there and wreck the football game?
You know, the thing is, I think that Will Anderson, isn't he going to be on Raimann mostly?
They kind of switch back and
him.
forth. It's just depending on like the strong side or the whichever strong side of the field. So it's kind of like the Colts, where I mean, primarily Anderson will be on Raimann, but there'll be times where he is on Smith, just like how Latu primarily is over on the left tackle and Pay is over the right tackle. But sometimes they will flip.
Very fair. So I get some serious the Jaguars game vibes where you have Trayvon Walker just putting Braden Smith on skis almost and just shoving him backwards. Okay, I have never seen Braden Smith get dominated like that. I mean, he was getting his ass beat by Trayvon Walker. So if that's the Braden Smith you're going to get, it could be a long, long day for Anthony Richardson. Now, if Braden Smith comes to play, he's handled Max Crosby, he's handled TJ Watt, he's handled guys that are on paper better than Danielle Hunter. So we'll have to see what happens here. It's going to be all about that knee that he just constantly deals with. That's where his power comes from, is being able to push back in blocking and run and pass. So we'll have to see, man. But I don't want to see him put on skis like Trayvon Walker did. That was awful to see.
Yeah, and Danielle Hunter is one of those guys that can go speed to power very, very quickly. And if he has to bull rush you, he will. So could that be a place that the Texans really want to take advantage of? We'll have to see. But I think for the most part, Braden Smith will be able to hold his own. Do I expect one of these guys to go out there and have 3-4 sacks in this game? No. The Colts offensive line has been very, very good all year. And guys, we're when we talk about Braden Smith struggling, I think we're kind of splitting hairs here too, because
like one game.
just because of the Colts offensive line has still done a really good job. Certainly did not do their best against the Dolphins, but the Dolphins were also sending the house on a lot of those different plays. So they definitely went through it. I'm sure Tony Sperano saw that and have these guys ready to bounce back this week. But yeah, I think that the weak point probably would be Braden Smith. We'll have to see what happens. And you might just see that if Braden Smith starts to struggle, the Texans could start to put more pressure to that side, maybe try to get Will Anderson one-on-one with Braden Smith so he can get back there and try to get some sacks. It's going to be very interesting to see how they attack this. But if the Colts offensive line comes out there and dominates and really shores up, you combine that with the fact that even though the Dolphins last week were sending the house and really sending the pressure, Anthony Richardson still wasn't sacked all game. You still have one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL at being able to break that pressure, break out of that sack. So wouldn't surprise me to see that even if they do start to bring the pressure, it's still going to be very hard to bring Anthony Richardson down.
Yeah, and Anthony Richardson in the pocket is simply put, he's a grown-ass man. The guy is really, really hard to sack. He's really hard to tackle. And you saw it with Jalen Ramsey. You saw it in the Dolphins game where, I mean, there's guys that had him dead to rights. He couldn't even see him on his blind side. They hit him full force, and he just sheds them off. So it's not going to be easy for the Texans to get Richardson down, but I really am intrigued to see that matchup on Braden Smith's side, because I know that he's played through that knee injury. I know he's a tough SOB, but, man, any given Sunday, that knee injury could also give him some serious issues. So we'll have to see.
On the opposite side of things, Drake, this Colts pass rush, they're going to have some opportunities to get after CJ Stroud. And like we always say, we say this every time the Colts play the Texans, but it's because it's true. The best way you can impact CJ Stroud is by getting that pressure right in his face. The Packers did an excellent job last week at really pressuring CJ Stroud, getting him uncomfortable, getting him off his spot. And guess what? He only threw for 86 yards against the Packers last week, which is really honestly unheard of and very surprising when you're talking about CJ Stroud. You look at the game in week 1 when Stroud last faced the Colts. Definitely the Colts did still get after him, had 4 sacks on the day, but Stroud, when he wasn't pressured or getting sacked, he lit up this Colts defense. 24 for 32. 234 yards and 2 touchdowns with a quarterback rating of 115.9. CJ Stroud you give him time, again, he's going to pick you apart. He's deadly accurate, but he's got to have the time. And that's the thing. This Texans offensive line, who I just have to point out, is coached by former Colts offensive line coach Chris Strausser. Kind of noticing a theme there with Chris Strausser, but this Texans offensive line has not been good. Really has not been good, and we saw that last week. Outside of Laramie Tunsil, there's not much to write home about this offensive line. And that's where you get to Forrest Buckner that comes into this. So Forrest Buckner, just like Jonathan Taylor, limited on Wednesday, full participant today in practice. Would not surprise me at all. Buckner himself said today to the media he feels really, really good, feels like himself again. Wouldn't surprise me if Buckner is out there, even though the Colts just activated his 21-day practice window. I would be, honestly, I'm predicting that DeForest Buckner will be out there in that 3 technique spot for the Colts. So, Drake, what do you think is going to happen with this Colts defensive line? Do you think we're going to see a bounce back performance? Because over the past couple of weeks, they got a little bit back on track last week, but against the Jaguars and the Titans, absolute no-shows. Do you think that's going to be the case again against another AFC South opponent, or do we see this Colts defensive line really get after CJ Stroud?
It's going to be hard to say, because they had Buckner in that first game, and they had Stewart and Buckner. And I mean, they didn't have Raekwon Davis, I don't think, but I mean, Raekwon Davis, ladies and gentlemen, has not been that great for the Indianapolis Colts. He's kind of been, you haven't really talked much about him. But I think that I'm concerned because the Colts just, outside of a couple games, I think the Bears and the Steelers, they have not contained anyone's ground game. They haven't been able to do it at all. I will say that if DeForest Buckner is even 75%, that really elevates, the chances of them stopping the ground game. But I think that's what it's going to be all about, because Joe Mixon is also coming off of a torrid performance against the Packers where he scored 2 touchdowns, had over 100 freaking rushing yards again. They're going to turn to him. I guarantee you they're going to try to do exactly what they did, only this time at home. Yeah, they're going to turn to Joe Mixon. So it's going to be paramount that defensive interior stops him, because if you let CJ Stroud lean on a freaking ground attack, oh my God, you're basically bound to lose.
I think, I still think though that Stroud is going to want to get out and throw. I still think that Stroud is going to be looking for those deep shots. No Nico Collins for this matchup, but still, I mean, Stroud is a guy that even when you do pressure him, he still can get away and make some plays with his feet on the run, throwing the football. He can pick up first downs with his legs. So it's going to be a little bit of a balance for this Colts team. You want to get pressure on CJ Stroud, but you don't want to run past him or allow him huge gaps where he can step up and step through, get outside the pocket and pick up yardage that way. You have to, like I always say with these types of quarterbacks, even though we don't think about CJ Stroud as a mobile quarterback, you got to keep him in the well. You got to keep him in the pocket. You can't have Taven Bryan getting pushed back, getting on a double team, 3 yards, which if DeForest Buckner is out there, hopefully we don't see much of Taven Bryan, but the same goes for Raekwon Davis. You don't want to see him getting pushed back too. You need to have gap discipline. Those guys still need to step up, because you're not going to see, I mean, DeForest Buckner on his first game back isn't going to be playing probably 80% of the snaps like we're used to seeing him. He's going to probably play 50 to 60% of the snaps. Grover Stewart, Kwity Paye, Leatu Latu, all of these guys, they're going to be in their normal rotation. So it is going to take all 8-9 defensive linemen that the Colts rotate in there to be disciplined, not allow this Titans defensive line to get an advantage, and really stand your ground and get upfield. I know that it's going to, I think maybe one of the bigger matchups that I'm more intrigued to see when it comes to the Colts defensive line and the Texans offensive line is Leatu Latu up against Laramie Tunsil, because it was a trial by fire. First ever NFL game, and Latu has to face Laramie Tunsil. Latu's now halfway through his rookie season, and while the stack numbers haven't been there, only has 2 sacks in the season, he was able to get to the quarterback last week. You're starting to see that momentum, and you're seeing consistent pressure out of Leatu Latu. This is a different Latu than Tunsil faced just a couple of months ago. I'm going to see what Latu can do on CJ Stroud. I want to see if the Colts are going to move him around. Do they move him over to the right side to try to get him a one-on-one matchup with Tyus Howard? Someone that isn't Laramie Tunsil, maybe take advantage of that. We'll have to see. But there's going to be opportunities for the Colts to get after CJ Stroud, and they have to bring him down, and they have to force him into throws before he is ready. So the stats, Matt, the third stat of the day presented by Busch Light. Packers were 19th in the NFL prior to the Houston game in pressure rate, but had their season high and Stroud's career high in pressure rate at 48.3%. That is absurd. Over half, no, not over, but just under half of the pass attempts, of the dropbacks by CJ Stroud, he was being pressured on. Unbelievable. And then against the New England Patriots, Houston gave up a 41.2% pressure rate. And those were Houston's last 2 games. Drake, this is just setting it up for this Colts defensive line to really get after CJ Stroud. And they've got the guys to do it. Now it's just about going out there and executing and doing it.
Yeah, and right now, guys, your leaders in sacks for the Indianapolis Colts, Dio Dangbo and Leatu Latu. They both have 2 sacks. Okay. Kwity Paye has to step up. All right. He's got to I will. I do have to emphasize this, and it's gonna be kind of irritating to mention it, but going back to the Titans game, this is a microcosm of what I think has happened with these pass rushers. Is there hasn't been that interior pressure. So you've got the quarterback right here, you've got the defensive backs coming in. All the quarterback has to do, he's about to get hit, nothing up front though. Step right into the pocket. Those guys are behind him at that point, and the tackles can just shove him off. That's all they have to do is just shove them right off on their running motion. So it's going to be about keeping Stroud right in that pocket, up front pressure, make him step back, and then you're going to put him right in the hands of guys like Latu, guys like Odangbo, guys like Pay. So it's really going to start and end up front with the pressure. I think that if for some reason Buckner is limited, I know you're not going to want to hear this, Andrew, but guys like Taven Bryan, guys like, Raekwon Davis, Grover Stewart, they're going to have to put that pressure on Stroud primarily if Buckner can't play, but I assume Buckner will.
Yeah, I'd be at this point. I'd be shocked if DeForest Buckner isn't out there against the Houston Texans. But the thing is, Drake, you kind of alluded to it earlier. They can't just focus in on CJ Stroud either. I assume that the Texans are really going to try to test this Colts run defense because they had so much success earlier in the season. The Texans ran for 213 yards on the ground against the Colts in week 1, 5.3 yards per carry average. And Joe Mixon, like you mentioned, 30 carries himself for 159 yards and a touchdown against the Colts there in Lucas Oil Stadium. And the Texans are going to have no issue if they're not getting anything through the air, but they're getting 5 yards per carry on the ground. They're going to have no issue continuing to hand the ball off to Joe Mixon, to Dameon Pierce, to Daru Ogunbowale, and just it took me a little bit on that one, and just taking the time, controlling the clock, and coming out of this game with a victory. This Colts run defense, yes, it will be improved with DeForest Buckner there in the middle. That's very obvious, but you got to have better linebacker play than you did in week 1. Because that's where a lot of the issues came, where these linebackers were getting completely thrown out of the play. EJ Speed, Zaire Franklin, both those guys had really poor games against the Houston Texans. Zaire Franklin has looked much better as of late. EJ Speed is coming off of a knee injury, but he was, again, full participant in practice. It looks like he is going to be good to go. The Colts should have their starting linebackers back, but they got to be better against the run. They can't allow Joe Mixon to just get 4 to 5 yards a pop and just it's be like death by 1,000 cuts, and have the Texans control the game. Then by the fourth quarter, this Colts defense is absolutely gassed because they've been on the field the entire game. And then it allows CJ Stroud to just make easy plays on third down because nobody can guard anybody at that point.
Yeah, I really don't want to see another John Gruden nicey video on Joe Mixon and just how excited he was about the Colts performance. Joe Mixon's addition to the Houston Texans, what a signing. I didn't think that he would have this kind of impact at all. It's almost like he's playing better somehow as a pure running back. But yes, if you allow, for the love of God, Bobby Slowick to go out there and just take Joe Mixon as a piece and just set the pace to the game. CJ Stroud is a pure passer who can throw the ball 40, 45 times and still be like 70%, 60%, 65% completion percentage or higher. You give him a ground game to operate with, minus Nico Collins, which he's shown he can beat the Colts without receiving weapons, right? Like, they're going to have to stop CJ Stroud, and they're also going to Joe Mixon. And this is kind of a side note that we didn't mention, but the linebackers, Zaire Franklin was cooked constantly in coverage. They're also going to have to contain Dalton Schultz, so there's going to be Joe Mixon and Dalton Schultz. Those are two guys that I think the linebackers exclusively are going to see a lot of, and they're going to have to step up, or those two guys might set up a lot for the Texans.
Joe Mixon on the season, 401 yards, 4 touchdowns, averaging 5.21 yards per carry. Mixon missed a few games as well, dealing with an injury of his own. That's the Colts run defense, again, has to have probably, outside of the Bears game but the Bears were just putrid running the football. The Colts have to have a good game against the run. And I'm not talking about limiting to 50 yards on the ground. If they do, I mean, that's a Colts victory easily. But you can't give up 200 yards. You can give up 100 yards. You can give up even 120 yards, but you got to be at least league average against the run. Currently, the Colts are 31st in the NFL against the run. They're giving up on average 159.9 yards per game. So
Wow.
if you want to be about middle of the pack, just average, that's about 115 to 120 yards a game. And that's what this Colts team needs. They just need an average performance out of their run defense. Don't let them take over the game, because if you do, then we're going to have the same situation that we were in week 1, where the Texans have the ball for 40 minutes and the Colts will only have it for 20. Fourth stat of the day, presented by Busch Light. This one by Busch Light Peach. God, I can't forget Busch Light Peach. The Houston running backs versus loaded boxes have 273 yards rushing on 59 runs, 47 yards over expected, which is the 6th most in the NFL. The Colts load the box on 49.9% of snaps, which is the 11th lowest, but are negative 49 rush yards allowed over expected, which is the 3rd fewest. That's kind of surprising to me, honestly, Drake, because I would expect that number to be much higher, considering how porous the Colts run defense has been for much of the year. But it does give some hope that this Colts team can have a decent performance against Joe Mixon and the Texans rushing offense.
Yeah, and they're going to need to, because like you mentioned, I mean, they've been watching the tape and they remember week 1. And Joe Mixon is also coming off of a heater performance after coming off of injury. So they're going to turn to Joe Mixon. If they can give him the ball 25, 30 times again, they're going to absolutely do that. Look, if you're going to beat the Colts defense, you want CJ Stroud to be the guy that's got to beat you, not Joe Mixon. That's way too easy.
Yeah, I would agree there. So but I think maybe the biggest point about this about this Texans offense, Drake, that really, really plays into the Colts' hands, no Nico Collins. You've talked about it. You've labeled Nico Collins the second coming of the Colts killer after A.J. Brown, DeAndre Hopkins. Nico Collins is the new Colts killer in the AFC South.
Man.
Seems like every time that the Colts play the Texans, Collins has a big game, and he's had a fantastic season up until this point. But there is no Nico Collins this week. Collins is on IR, and that really limits this Texans offense, in my opinion. Stephon Diggs has been good for the Texans. Not great, but he's certainly been good. Tank Dell has taken a massive step back, and I think that is because of Stephon Diggs being in this offense. Tank Dell not getting the amount of opportunities that he did last season, but with Nico Collins out, there is going to be more opportunities for Tank Dell. So, Drake, how big of an impact do you think this is going to, that Nico Collins not being out there is going to have on this game?
I look back to week 18 of last year. Okay, so they had Schultz and Collins only. They didn't have anybody else really to throw the ball to. Stroud still cooked the Colts. Okay, I know Nico Collins is the best receiver, but now you have Stephon Diggs, who is almost at 1,000 receptions in his career already. He's like at 860. This is a guy who's proven that he can make this happen. So you can't take this team lightly. I don't care. I mean, I remember last year, everyone was saying, well, they've only got Nico Collins to throw to. He went out there and he hit him a bunch and cooked Juju Brents. So it's like, you can't take this lightly. I will say, though, that's a bit, because I said when they signed Stephon Diggs, when they traded and they got Stephon Diggs, I said, Nico Collins will be the number 1 receiver, period. He is going to be the guy. Okay, so this is going to be harder for CJ Stroud to move the football, but it's still CJ Stroud we're talking about. If you allow him to start getting a ground game going, that's going to make things easier. But really, guys like Xavier Hutchinson have to step up. He's a second-year player, really hasn't blossomed into much. Like you said, Tank Dell isn't really blowing up anything, and neither is Dalton Schultz, but neither was Jonnu Smith, and then he did against the Colts. So you just have to treat this as if Nico Collins is out there. You have to take this team as serious as you would if Nico Collins was out there, in my opinion, because CJ Stroud showed last year that he doesn't need all the receiving weapons that he has to beat you.
I think 2 things are going to be key for the Colts secondary in this one. Number 1, when the last time these 2 teams played, it was Juju Brents out there, a hurt Juju Brents, I might add, who hurt his knee in the middle of the game, played through it, didn't have his best game. They haven't played this version of Samuel Womack III. Sam Womack is out there still playing at a very, very high level. The Texans haven't played Sam Womack. I think Sam Womack is going to be a difference maker in this one. But number two, Drake, I think Kenny Moore has to have his best game of the year. I really do. I think Kenny Moore has to have one of those vintage Kenny Moore type games where he's not only contributing in the running game, he's got to make plays in the passing game. One of the plays that he made last week against the Dolphins, it was almost like a pass off where he started outside, came inside, and had that fantastic PBU. Just unbelievable play by Kenny Moore. I think Zach Hicks put it up on Twitter when he was doing a film piece on Kenny Moore this week. But fantastic. I think it needs to be even better than that. I think you need to have a turnover by Kenny Moore. I think you need to have that playmaking Kenny Moore out there. And I think he needs to really lock down his matchup, whether that is Stephon Diggs or Tank Dell. Both of those guys is where CJ Stroud is going to look on third down. He's going to look for his security blankets on those. And you can't be giving up. You can't allow those guys to get free runs over the middle of the field, just on drag routes, on crossing routes, allow them to pick up the first down. I think Kenny Moore is going to be crucial in that regard. So if the Colts want to win this game, or if the Colts do win this game, I should say, you're probably looking at a really good game out of Kenny Moore.
Yeah, and, look, Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell, they're going to have to really step up, but it's going to be Diggs that I think is going to take over as the number one receiver, and he plays inside and outside almost even. So,
they really move him around, yeah.
Yes, Sam Womack's going to see him. Jalen Jones is going to see him. Kenny Moore is going to see him. Tank Dell's probably going to play out a little outside, inside too. Those three guys specifically have got to have a big game, but like you said, Kenny Moore, for some reason, it just seems like he's going to have a play that's going to change the game. So, if he has a big play, it really will help the Colts' chances.
That's kind of a good segue into our X factor for this one, Drake. And this one I think is going to come down to, this one is different than what I was thinking last week against the Dolphins, where it was really hard to choose. This one, I think it comes down to very few specific players in this one. I think this is where the stars have to come out. When it's this close of a contest, I think it's going to be a star that really makes the difference in this game. So I'll let you go first as always. Who is your X factor in this matchup between the Colts and the Texans?
Man, you know what? I'm going to go, just because I know that he might be a little bit limited, I'm going to go with the guy that I know is 100% fresh. That's Grover Stewart. I'm going with Grover Stewart because last week you saw him have a couple big plays in that against Miami in the ground game. He needs that. He needs to have a couple big stops in the backfield. I want to see Grover Stewart looking at the NRG Stadium crowd and going, like he did against the Dolphins, man. I mean, you have to stop those interior gaps. Tony Pollard did it. Devon Achane did it. A lot of guys have done it to the Colts where you just hand that ball off, go right through the A or B gap. That's it. And so I think you have to shore that up, force Mixon to go outside, force Stroud to throw the ball a little bit more, not lean on that ground game. It's going to be paramount for Grover Stewart, I think, to just plug up those gaps, man.
Yeah, I could see that. I really could. And this season I've been really trying to pick my X factors as not the obvious types of guys, but I think this game is really just that simple. And Stats Matt, as always, reading my mind, it's Anthony Richardson. I really think Anthony Richardson has to be the X factor in here, because I think I've said DeForest Buckner will help, Jonathan Taylor will help, Kenny Moore has to have his best game. I think it all comes down to how Anthony Richardson plays, Drake. Which Amen. Anthony Richardson are we going to see? Are we going to see the Anthony Richardson that played against the Dolphins? If so, I don't think the Colts win this game. I think the Colts need to see the Anthony Richardson that started the game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, or the Anthony Richardson that started the game against the Houston Texans in week 2. And I'm leaning towards the one that we saw last year in week 2. I really have a feeling that this Colts team is going to rely heavily on the run game with Anthony Richardson to set up the pass. And I think if the Colts don't have success in the run game, it's going to be really challenging for them to overcome the talent that's on this Texans team. But Anthony Richardson has shown that he can do that. When Anthony Richardson gets rolling on the ground, it just makes things so much simpler for this offense, and it opens up so much more for this offense. So if Anthony Richardson really starts to have success on the ground, that'll open success through the air, and then I think this Colts team is going to be really, really hard to deal with for the Texans defense. Paul Wilson with our first super chat of the evening. Thank you so much, brother, for all of your support. And Paul says, I think that poor offensive line is going to be the key for the Colts. We can force CJ Stroud to speed up just enough for him to have an average game. So, you're talking about the poor offensive line for the Houston Texans. Yeah, I think it's going to be key for this pass rush to really get after CJ Stroud. And then Paul says, I'm taking Taylor as my X factor. I think he is 100% healthy. 100% healthy Jonathan Taylor would be music to the Colts' ears against this Houston Texans team. But Paul, thank you so much again, brother, for all of your support. It really does mean a lot to Drake and I, and we love having you here every episode. You're one of the regulars, and we appreciate the love to you, man. But it's prediction time, Drake. We've gone 50 minutes talking about this game. We've really done a deep dive on this game. It's time to give our predictions. Like I said, like it's on the screen here. Colts 5-point underdogs to the Houston Texans. Over under is 46. Drake, when the dust settles on Sunday, are the Colts tied atop the AFC South standings, or are they in a theoretical three-game gap between themselves and the Houston Texans?
I don't think they get this one, dude. I'm sorry. I predicted before the season that they would get swept by Houston, just because I did think that there was enough tape on Richardson's rookie year for teams to at least be able to somewhat understand how to contain him as he develops. So I don't think it's about Richardson, man. I think it's about that run defense. That run defense really worries the crap out of me. Joe Mixon coming off of another great game. I think that the Houston Texans get this one 30-27. I think the Colts cover the spread, but I just think that it's going to be close. But I just think that the Colts don't have enough in the ground game or ground defense right now to stop the Houston Texans from doing it again.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair because this Texans team showed how much they dominated the Colts. And Drake, normally I think I would lean on that side of things as well. But I've just got a feeling this week, and sometimes that's all you need. It's just a gut feeling. I feel like it's something that we didn't talk about much, but I want to talk about it here just for a second. I really think that Shane Steichen was embarrassed about how he performed last week as a play caller and as a game planner. He said it wasn't just one time where he said, I've got to be better. I think it was in his 17 different, I think he was asked 17 questions after the game. It was either 8 or 11 of those responses included, it starts with me, I got to be better. I really think Shane Steichen is out to prove that this team can be better this week. I think you're going to see a masterclass from Shane Steichen. So I am going with the Colts this week. Again, I think it's going to be close. I'm going 30 like you did for the winners. I'm going 34-26 Indianapolis. I do think that the CJ Stroud and the Texans are going to have an opportunity there at the end. But I think that we're going to see this Colts defense really lock down. Wouldn't surprise me if we see a sack by Latu or DeForest Buckner on that final drive. And CJ Stroud doesn't have Nico Collins to bail him out in this one. So I'm going Colts 30, Texans 26, and I think we see a really big upset in NRG Stadium on Sunday.
You know what? If that happens, I'm pretty confident that every single Colts fan would be absolutely elated because on paper, this looks like a get-right game for the Texans. But if you're the Indianapolis Colts, like you mentioned with Shane Steichen, kind of feel a little bit embarrassed. And if you guys haven't noticed, Andrew Moore loves to dive into the quotes. I mean, to say that at 8 out of the 11 quotes, Steichen, hey, if Steichen says it starts with me, I got to do better that much. He's never taken that much accountability because he's never had to. So I think I love what Andrew Moore just did. I think Shane Steichen might be a little bit embarrassed. So we'll see.
There's going to be some tricks up his sleeve this week. I wouldn't surprise me one bit. Paul Wilson is saying that Houston was exposed last week. I think the Colts win 24-21.
Ooh.
And Sean Contright also saying 31-30 Colts. So we got a lot of people on the Colts. That makes sense. You guys are Colts fans that watch this show, so I wouldn't expect anything less. But
That's
regardless,
right.
Drake, it's going to be a nail biter. These games always are. These teams play each other extremely tough. It's going to be a very good game on Sunday between these two teams. Now let's take a look at the injury report for the Indianapolis Colts, because guys, a lot of good news with this one this week. You look at the injury report here, and boy, if you just saw Wednesdays, you're thinking, my God, not good getting ready to go up against the Texans. But look at Thursday. All but 2 players on the injury report were full participants. That includes Josh Downs, Ryan Kelly, Chris Lamont, Michael Pittman Jr., Braden Smith, DeForest Buckner, Jonathan Taylor, Ashton Doolin, Cameron McGrone, who also had his 21-day practice window opened up coming off of IR, and EJ Speed. Out of all those guys that were full today, I expect all of them to play on Sunday against the Houston Texans.
And, you know, the thing is, the biggest question marks, I remember saying this in an update on the injury report, DeForest Buckner and Jonathan Taylor. I think the biggest question mark really is Jonathan Taylor, because Colts fans, DeForest Buckner will play through anything that doesn't completely cripple him. So I would fully expect everybody. The only guy that I'm like, is it going to be full, is Jonathan Taylor. But then again, you got to look back. Half these guys did not practice, limited participants. One day later, they're full. So,
and I think with how Jonathan Taylor takes care of his body, he's not going to go out there unless he feels like he's 100%, just because, especially at the running back position, he's gone through ankle injuries, severe ankle injuries before, and he knows that if you're not 100%, how this thing can linger and how this thing can really take a turn on you. So I really do think that we're going to see a fully healthy Jonathan Taylor out there on Sunday. Of the DNPs for Thursday, Jernard Avery and Jalen Carlisle. We know Jalen Carlisle is going to be out for a little bit, probably at least a couple of weeks, Shane Steichen said. But to get, guys back like EJ Speed, Jonathan Taylor, DeForest Buckner, all guys that missed last week's game against the Dolphins, and in the case of Taylor and Buckner even more, that's just so huge for this Indianapolis Colts team to be close to as close to full strength as they can be, and knock on wood or knock on whatever is nearby. The Colts haven't been this healthy, it seems, in at least a month, probably more than a month. So probably back to week 2, if we're being honest. So really encouraging sign for all of these guys that are on the injury report. And we do have another super chat from NFL Nerd. Thank you so much, brother, for your support. PFF doesn't give us post-game presser stats. Hey, that's all me, brother. I dive into those because that's where the majority of my my articles. I like to give you the stories and talk about what the guys are saying, what Shane Steichen's saying, Anthony Richardson. That's where I like to do the meat of my reporting, covering this team. But NFL Nerd, thank you so much for all of your support. Really, really do appreciate it. Drake, let's talk about the latest Colts news and rumors before we send the good people out of here. Really not much to talk about besides, guess what? Spencer Schrader got released from the practice squad again. Might as well just keep that in there in our notes. Spencer Schrader released from the practice squad. The Colts signed wide receiver Ethan Fournier to the practice squad. Just a couple of practice squad moves this week for the Indianapolis Colts. Hey, like I always say, as long as those checks keep cashing, Spencer Schrader doesn't give a damn whether he's cut or not. And they never clean out his locker. Mike Chappell said that, by the way, every time that they cut him, they never clean out his locker because they know he's just going to be back in a couple of days. So really just the same old for the Colts.
The last episode we had, we reported that he was signed with, I think, Ethan Fournier, and then you're like, "That's okay. He's just going to get released in a couple days," and he did. So you
Yep.
called it yet again. I think it's like five.
Yep.
5
And
times.
guys, on Monday he'll be added back to. By the time we're talking to you guys again on Monday, he will be added back to the practice squad. I can guarantee you that. But Drake, big weekend, big game on Sunday, week 8, Colts Texans at NRG Stadium. No T.Y. Hilton, unfortunately, so we're not going to see the clown mask out there. We're not going to see the Texans killer. But man, this is going to be a good game. This is going to be an intense game. And again, you think it's going to come down to the run defense, which I think is really crucial. I think is going to come down to how Anthony Richardson plays on Sunday. I think that just kind of shows and encapsulates how crucial the entire game is going to be, how all three sides for the Indianapolis Colts are going to have to be playing their best football in order to take down the Houston Texans.
And it's a sneaky game. I know a lot of people probably aren't talking about this, but this is a battle for AFC South supremacy. So if the Texans take it, they're the undisputed leaders. If the Colts take this game, they're fighting Houston very closely for that lead. So this game has so much writing on it. So we'll have to see, man.
Yep, we got one more super chat to end us tonight. Paul Wilson, again, thank you so much, brother, for all of your support. Really, really do appreciate it. Starting to give the CFO a run for his money. We'll let the CFO off the hook because he's out up in Canada enjoying his vacation. Hopefully, he's having a great time up there. Paul says the Texans have also allowed more points scored than the Colts on defense. Bend, but don't break this week. It's going to take a full effort by all, like I said, all three sides for the Indianapolis Colts. We'll see if by the time we're talking to you next Monday, is it going to be the third victory Monday in a row? And we're talking about the Colts atop the AFC South, or we're talking about more issues with this Colts team as we reach the halfway point. So that's our show for tonight, guys. Appreciate everybody that tuned in to talk Colts Texans with us. Like I said, huge game on Sunday. It's going to be a lot of fun. Shout out to our super chats, Paul Wilson and NFL Nerd. You guys are the absolute best. Thank you so much for your generosity, and thank you everyone else that joined us this evening. Again, if you haven't done so, please go follow us on all of our socials, like Horseshoe Huddle on Facebook, follow at Colts_SI on X, and then make sure you're subscribed here on the Horseshoe Huddle YouTube channel. Hit that bell so you know when Drake and I go live every Monday and Thursday night so you never miss us. And then wherever you listen to podcasts, please subscribe and give us a 5-star review so we can reach other Colts fans just like you. Drake, you've got a ton of stuff out there on horseshoehuddle.com, but there's no surprise there. Tell the people what they need to go check out before Sunday's game.
Man, we got a lot of good stuff on Indianapolis Colts on SI, but the one that I'm really proud of, and that's because there were so many points in the show made that are in that article, and that's the 5 keys to a Colts victory over the Texans, releasing tomorrow morning. Go check it out, everybody.
Yes, please do. And myself got a piece out there on Anthony Richardson. He really dove into what he saw on the film against the Dolphins and how he plans to rectify that and how he's preparing to face off against the Houston Texans for the 3rd time in his career. I also have a piece out on Jonathan Taylor and DeForest Buckner, how they're feeling and what to expect from these guys in their first game back since both of them suffered those high ankle sprains. I'll tell you what, guys, I think both those guys are going to be ready to go and ready to prove themselves again on Sunday. So be sure to check that out, as well as everything else on Horseshoe Huddle at Indianapolis Colts on SI. Go follow Drake at DWalster You can follow me at Andrew Moore NFL. We'll be back Monday night to break it all down for you between the Colts and the Texans. It's going to be a wild one. So be sure to tune in then. Enjoy your weekend, everyone. And we'll see you right back here on Monday night to talk more Colts football with all of you.